Okay, looks like my turn. Thought I'd start with my favorite Palm Sunday picture. Everyone should see my Palm Sunday picture. That's me at Palm Sunday in Ghana. Wow, 7 years ago? No, it can't be. Yeah, wow, 2014. Anyway, still didn't have any hair back then. That's my house in the background, in case you're wondering. It's a bit of a fixer-upper. So this week, let me stop sharing the screen. This week, we have this theme going on, and the theme is, well, this current, this idea that the waves around us are choppy and life is chaotic and all sorts of stuff is coming at us, but hopefully there's underneath it all this deep current of hope, of faith that runs through our lives. And so that's what I was thinking about when I read the passage for this morning, the John 12 passage. And I thought, well, there's got to be some signs in there. Well, how can you tell that you're sort of flowing with the deep current rather than being overwhelmed by the waves? And the bad news is that I came up with 9 signs for that in this passage. So what I'm actually going to ask is, I don't really track time very well. So Scott, you're sort of in charge. And when it gets too long, just break in with some music, and then I'll know it's time to cut it short. How about that? So here's the 9 signs that you're resting well in the current despite all the choppiness of the waves of life around you. Okay, so this passage starts out with Jesus, who's coming to Bethany, to the home of Lazarus, right? Because Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. And I mentioned last week that we're in the Gospel of John, and in the Gospel of John, everything is a metaphor, even like the metaphors are metaphors. Right, so this raising of Lazarus from the dead is the description of an event, and it's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor for this new life that comes through Jesus, right? Jesus uses phrases like eternal life and new life and just life in general. And this is one of the signs, this new life that comes on, that comes into our regular, ordinary existence. And when we feel that, when we're part of that, then we know that we are in this deeper current of hope. Right? And the most obvious sign of this eternal life is love, right? So because we're in the Gospel of John, and the 3 major themes in the Gospel of John are love, love, and love. And so, right, this is, if we took our time, we just see it over and over and over again, right? So when you feel love, when you can express this life-giving love of God for you, and you can express it to others, you're sort of feeling the deep current of hope. So that's number 1. So Jesus gets to Bethany, and the first thing they do is they give a dinner for him, right? And this is a really important thing. This is not, like we all got to eat, right? But taking time to eat with one another is important. It's part of the signs. It's one of the signs that we're heading in the right direction. And I know this is really hard because it's COVID, and it's done 2 things. It's made it very difficult to gather together with others, maybe even impossible for some of you. And I think it's also made us hesitant. We've gotten used to not doing that. And so when it becomes safe again, we're going to have to deliberately work at that. We're going to have to deliberately start to go out or invite people in and start eating together and learn those skills again, because eating together around a table is a skill. It's one of the things I learned in Ghana, because Ghanaians don't have that skill. And when you gather with a group of people to eat in Ghana, everybody just stops talking and then they eat. And then afterwards you talk again. And when you try to have a conversation in the middle of a meal, everybody looks at you funny, right? So it's a skill you have to learn. So next week, right? Hopefully sometime next week, you can find a time to gather together with other people, either in your own group or in the church, to gather together for eating. And maybe just as a symbol, leave an extra chair for Jesus. I just have an empty chair going, that's Jesus's chair. We know he's here, but he's, sort of hard to see sometimes. But all part of a symbol that you're in this deeper current of hope. Now, as they're sitting down to eat, right, we have this description, right? Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those sitting at a table with Jesus, right? And you get a very, very typical kind of domestic scene, right? Where the women are running around doing this and that. And the next thing, the guys are sitting there going, oh boy, it sure is nice to have a nice relaxing meal for change, isn't it, Martha? And Martha probably throws something at him at that point, right? But it's not that simple. And that's because if we were reading it from the Greek, the word that describes what Martha is doing is diakoneo. And diakoneo is the word from which we get the term deacon. Martha is serving, but it's also a word that gets translated in other places as ministering, right? Or as deaconing, right? That's like Martha is doing my job. She is ministering to people. So in this context, Martha is acting like a disciple is supposed to be acting. Lazarus is just sitting there like a lazy bum, right? So Lazarus, when he's sitting there, is not being a true disciple of Jesus, and Martha is showing us what it means to be a true disciple, right? So we have both a positive and a negative image of what it means to be a disciple. And I know this is tricky, right? This is tricky because, social expectations just make this so that, well, yeah, and the women are just going to, keep doing all the real work, and the guys are going to sit around and go, see, good job, right? But there's still something about serving. There's still something about deaconing that is important in all of this, and trying to figure out how to do that in the modern church. Always tricky, still important. So in the middle of this, Mary, right, who is probably also serving, who knows, right? She took a pound of costly pure nard, right, of perfume, and wiped Jesus' feet with him, right? So we get this, the fourth sign that you're in the deep current is this extravagant joy and celebration. And we don't do that very well. We don't do extravagant celebrations, I think, as well as we should. But Mary just throws it all out there. And I've done numerous sermons on this story alone. Deb doesn't like me to do those because they're a little expensive, right? But it's just so important to be extravagant once in a while, but not, right? Mary doesn't go out and buy herself a pair of $600 shoes, right? She does something for somebody else in an extravagant way. That's an important part of this, right? So there's this extravagant joy and celebration. That's number 4. Feels like I'm rushing, sorry. The next sign we get is the sign of Judas. And this is our only negative sign. Here's how you can tell you're not in the current. And that is when you get excessively concerned about money, right? And so this passage tells us, these people who are concerned about money, they're probably stealing it, right? So that's one of these signs where you can look and go, oh yeah, that's what I'm not supposed to be doing when we're really fussed, right? If we take all of our leadership team meetings in church and we spend the whole time on the budget every week or every month, we're going, no, we are not doing our job here, right? I mean, there has to be a budget. So, we have to talk about it a little bit once in a while. But if that's the focus of our concern, right, that's not a good. That's not what we should be doing as a church. And if you're doing the same thing in your own mind, right, this is not where you should be going. And Jesus says, the poor you will always have with you, which is one of the most misunderstood verses, I think, that Jesus ever says, because people often think that means, see, right, the poor, you're always going to have the poor among you, don't worry about it. But Jesus is very clearly here quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 15:11. And Deuteronomy 15:11 says, look, we've done all this stuff you're supposed to be doing to make sure there is no poverty. Still is going to be some. Therefore, open your hands and give generously. Right? So that's that's the context of the poor you will always have with you, is that, right? You get these signs of generosity. The next verses talk about the great crowd that gathered, right? They came out to see Lazarus, and they came out to see Jesus, and then the chief priests came, right, and saw how, right, in all of this, right, a life that's sort of flowing in the current of hope attracts attention, and it attracts attention. Some of it's positive. People go, hey, you guys are doing something right. You folks, you have something there, or I really appreciate what's going on here, and negative attention. Because there are some people who are part of the old system, and they like the old system, and they like the fact that there's the rich and the poor, let's just stay that way because we're, somewhere up here. At least, we're better than them. Right? We want to maintain that feeling. And so you get both positive and negative attention going on. But I think the other side of it is that if the church is attracting no attention at all, then right, we're not in the current. Right? If the church is just sort of sitting there and everybody goes, oh, church, whatever, right, then we gotta do something about that. Right? And maybe the same thing is true of your life, that if your neighbors, right, and your friends don't notice anything, maybe you should do something to make them notice. Right? I was talking to a friend over Zoom the other day, and he was sort of embarrassed, a pastor friend. He was sort of embarrassed that he'd never been arrested. That he thought, if he was really doing his job right, he probably would be getting arrested more often, which would be a way of getting attention, right? If we didn't have church next week because I was in jail, somebody would notice. Still not sure my kids are also embarrassed that I haven't been arrested. So you can talk to them about that. So then somebody organizes. We don't know who organized this party, right? But Jesus comes into town, sort of in a big procession, but he's sitting on a donkey's colt, right? So again, I think of this as laughing at the current system, because in Jesus' day, the current system says that the king is supposed to be entering, right, up on a big war horse, and he's got to have his soldiers around him, right, with their spears and their fierce demeanors and their big muscles. And he's supposed to be, right, also in full armor, even though he's never actually, poked anybody with a sword in his life, but he's at least got to be, wearing the right military uniform, right? We know how that looks. And Jesus, it's like, imagine the general in the parade, right, who's driving this little toy tank right down the street, right? Right, that's what Jesus is doing here. He's sort of laughing at this system, this whole military system, this whole political system that it undergirds, and he's deliberately mocking it, deliberately saying, this is, really not where I'm going at all here, and it's not a system that's worth maintaining, and I'm not going to be part of it. The next verses say that Jesus is doing this because it is written. And it's this reminder that this current of hope, this current of faith that moves us along is part of a longer story, right? Which is why we keep reading this really, really old book every week. And the old book reminds us that, and there's even older parts to this old book that are, right, part of this long, long story. And so entering in this long, long story, if you're doing something, right, that you're just making it up as you go along, that's not the way to go here. The way to go is to find the current, to find this deeper current of hope and faith that's been moving along ever since Adam and Eve, or wherever you want to start the story, Moses or Abraham or Jesus, or right, and Lamont if you want, right? But there's this much, much longer story that we are part of, this current that has been flowing for centuries already. So that's point number 8. See, we're moving right along here, right? And then the last thing is that the disciples, they didn't understand, right? And then the Pharisees say, look, you see, you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone out after him. There's sometimes when we're part of this movement of hope that victory looks inevitable. Like, why would anybody not want this? Why would anybody not want to be part of this movement? Why is there even opposition? It makes no sense to me that someone would oppose nuclear disarmament. Why would anybody oppose that, right? Or feeding poor people. Why would anybody oppose that? Or giving everybody health care. Why would anybody oppose that? It's just so obvious that, well, of course it's going to happen. And so there's sometimes, right, where the Pharisees go, there's nothing we can do. He's going to win, right? Whether you like it or not. And then, right, if we keep on reading a little while in John, we'd notice that there's sometimes where defeat looks inevitable. That, Jesus ends up on a cross, which looks a lot like defeat. which looks completely like defeat. And the forces of death have won. And there's times in, even today when there's something that the current seems to be calling us to, and it's just not happening. And it seems to be getting worse rather than before it's getting better. And maybe we should just, curl up in a ball and go to sleep for, a few centuries, and maybe it'll be better then. And it's important to realize that neither of these things are true. Victory is not inevitable. And defeat is also not inevitable. That's some of this relies on you and me, not all of it. It's not all on you. It's not all on me. It's not all on us, right? Even the church worldwide, right, isn't enough, right? We need friends who aren't really friends, and we need enemies who aren't really enemies, and it's all going to get really, really messy. But right, we each have a little part in this. We each have a little part in this larger current, that even though the current flows on without us, right, maybe to stretch the metaphor a bit, maybe the boat still needs some paddling. And if we don't paddle the boat, well, it goes a little slower then. So this is, right, the final point in all of this, is that while victory is not inevitable, neither is defeat. We have a task. In all of this, we're invited to be part of it. And it's, I think, very helpful to think of it as being invited to a party, being invited to a celebration, right? That this is what Jesus did, is he invited people to join in as he rode into town on a donkey. And it wasn't going to work out well. And he knew this, right? But you still invite people to the party. And you hope that the joy of those times sustains you through the bad times, right? And then also this deep current of hope sustains you through the bad times, and that you find it in yourself to celebrate the good times, because sometimes celebration is hard too. So this is what we do when we look through John chapter 12, and we try to find these signs of hope, the signs of the deeper current that we're part of. So time to go to breakout rooms. Invite you to take some time to share with one another these signs that you find in your own life, the good and the bad, signs of the deeper hope that you feel.